Thanks, everyone. Good to see you. So we'll dive in. I'm Rabbi Josh Weisman. I serve a congregation in the East San Francisco Bay Area in Northern California. Um, I'm a co-founder of the Big Bold Jewish Climate Fest, which is how I met Hannah. Thanks, Hannah, for inviting us to present. My co-teacher today is Rabbi Julie Saxe-Thaler, who will introduce herself in a minute when she joins. Both of us have found that climate action has become a significant part of what we do as rabbis without necessarily having intended for it to be that way. But it's the world we live in, and we are being responsive, and it feels more urgent than ever. I wanted to start by actually sharing an anecdote. My mother recently passed away. I'm in Shloshim, right, still, and I've been thinking a lot about her origins. I used to visit the small Wisconsin town that she grew up in. And when I was a kid, my grandfather, her dad, was alive. And he would go pretty much every morning to Chet Johnson's Drugs. And they had nickel coffee at a coffee counter in the back of the store. So my grandpa and the other guys from the town would go have coffee at the back counter. And they would talk about things, but one topic that was a constant was what you were just discussing earlier, the weather. And the reason I mention this is because we, overeducated folks like to say, oh, the weather is a terrible thing to talk about. It's what you talk about when you have nothing else to talk about, et cetera, et cetera. But that couldn't be further from the truth, especially when you're in a small town in Wisconsin where the regional economy depends on agriculture, and the weather has everything to do with how that year's crop will do. And that trickles through, I won't say trickle down, but that trickles across to everyone else in the region. Everyone, whether you're working in agriculture or not. And my grandfather was an electrician. He was the town electrician. He had a little electric shop. He made house calls. He wasn't working in farming, but it mattered to him how the crops were doing. And therefore it mattered to him and to everyone in town, from the town doctor, the town lawyer, Chet Johnson, who owned the drugstore, to the farmers themselves, mattered to everyone how the weather was doing because they depended on it. And that experience meant that when I started to, although I grew up in Berkeley, California, not so much an agricultural economy, when I started encountering texts from the Mishnah, from Torah, ancient Jewish texts that were very interested in things like rainfall and the weather, and when these things should happen, when they shouldn't happen, in what proportions they should and should not happen, under what circumstances weather should happen, it made sense to me. These texts were addressed to agricultural societies, to societies where everyone, directly or indirectly, and mostly directly, depended on the weather for their livelihood, for the ability to eat. So I'd like us to place ourselves in that mindset. I'd like us to put ourselves in the shoes of not only our ancient forebears who these texts were addressed to, but also people around the world today, and probably close to where you live, maybe right where you live, who really depend in a very immediate way on good weather for their direct livelihood. And then to remember, as we read, that actually, even if we're more removed from that in an immediate sense, maybe we live in an urban center, we have a profession that seems more distant from agriculture, actually, we all really do depend on the weather occurring in its natural cycles in the proper proportions at the right times, and to really step into that awareness, which so much of our Jewish tradition urges us to be aware of. And so many practices, texts, stories, rituals, prayers are designed to help us be aware of the proper natural cycles of the earth, and specifically of weather. And that forms the basis for Mishnah Ta'anit. So Ta'anit means fast, as in refraining from food and drink, but it's actually just as much about weather. And we'll see why in a moment. I am going to put the source sheet as a link in the chat. And I'll ask you to take a moment to pull that up.
You are a co-host if you wish to
Great.
share it in the Zoom.
It'd be a little easier for me if we could all independently put up our pull up the source sheet, because we may do a breakout group a little bit later, and also my screen will be more manageable. So if you could all just
Rabbi, it's telling me I need access, so others may get that
okay.
experience as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me change access on that. Here we go. Anyone with the link? All right. Thank you for that heads up. Please try again.
Here we go.
Thanks. All right. So Mishnah 1:4 is our first source. This is actually, we're going to skip this 1:1. We're going to go down to 1:4. So please go to the bottom of that first page. Onto the second page, please, where it says Mishnah Ta'anit 1:4. It refers to Mar Cheshvan. Mar Cheshvan is another name for the Hebrew month of Cheshvan, which is the month after the high holidays. In other words, the month after Sukkot takes place. We start praying for rain on Shmini Atzeret, the 8th day, final day of the Sukkot holiday series. So that's towards the end of Tishrei. So now we're several weeks after we've started praying for rain on the 17th of Mar Cheshvan. That's our signpost in the seasons of the year. Could someone please read aloud for us in the English Mishnah 1:4 here?
If the 17th of Mar Cheshvan arrived and rain has not fallen, individuals, but not the entire community, begin to fast 3 fasts for rain. How are these fasts conducted? As the fast begins in the morning, one may eat and drink after dark, and one is permitted during the days of the fast themselves to engage in the performance of work, in bathing and smearing oil on one's body, in wearing shoes, and in conjugal relations.
Thank you. And as we'll see, thanks very much for stepping up for that, Becky. As we'll see, these restrictions change if the rains continue to not fall. But here we are, a few weeks after we've started praying for rain at the end of Sukkot. It hasn't rained, and so we start to fast 3 fasts on an individual basis. Why is fasting a response to a drought? Why might it be? No wrong answers. I mean, I've learned.
This is a wrong answer, but I'm going to say it anyway.
Okay, good.
Just that I'm in Colorado, and the Colorado River report just came out that 50% of the water used in that report is to raise feed grain for cattle. And so if you're not eating, you're taking less water. Obviously, that's the wrong answer, because scientifically, even the delay is not really there. But there's so much water embedded in the food we eat is my point. But I don't think that's what this is about.
Becky, I don't think you're wrong at all. I think there's absolutely something to what you're saying. If the rain isn't falling, and by the way, when we talk about fasting in Judaism, we're also talking about refraining from drinking water. Okay, so when we talk about fasting, it's not eating and not drinking.
Okay.
No water falling. Yeah, go ahead.
So first, maybe the rabbis thought that God was attending to the community's behavior, see the fasting as a kind of self-awareness, and then might encourage more rain. So that might have been what they were thinking. And the other thing is that while people are fasting, it draws attention that something is out of the ordinary. It's the same as like a hunger strike by protesters or prisoners. So it would make people aware. This weather is strange. Notice. Wake up.
Thank you, Bob and Becky. All of those, I think, are really insightful observations on what might be the connection between fasting and a drought or a lack of rain at the right time. It raises awareness. It calls people attention to a problem that they might otherwise not pay enough attention to. Maybe it has to do with the theology that perhaps the drought is seen as a response to our misbehavior, and the fasting is a kind of penance for that would change the moral balance and perhaps produce more rain. And also, if there's just on a basic level, if there's less rain falling, that hurts the cycle of food production. And there's going to be, sooner or later, there will be less food available. So on a certain level, it might make sense to limit your consumption of food. Faye, were you going to say something?
It's just a number of weeks ago, I was in a class where we were talking about how coming into the land of Israel from the desert was the first time that the people were dependent on the weather and on God providing weather that was amenable for them to grow food, because they'd had manna in the desert. And I think it's that sense that it's tied. It's a promise that if you obey the laws, that you will have prosperity and good crops and all of the rest. And I think it's very tied in our biblical texts, as well as sort of our sense of well-being, to the fact that it does relate to the behavior of the people.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Welcome, Rabbi Julie.
And welcome, Rabbi Julie Saxe, my friend and colleague and partner in this endeavor. And Julie, we're just on the first source right now. We're wrapping that up. So thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
Yeah. All of that, all of what's been said so far is on point. And just to offer a gloss that I think ties together some of those pieces, there's a kind of ritual mirroring going on here as well. With our bodies, we're mirroring or reflecting what's going on actually with the earth. The earth is thirsty, right? The earth is not getting the water it needs. No rain means no crops. Therefore, we're refraining from eating and drinking. We're mirroring, we're reflecting what's happening to the earth's body with our own bodies on a physical level. Could you consider it a kind of solidarity with the earth? I think that's fair to say. The earth is suffering. We know that sooner or later we'll suffer as a result as well. We're with the earth. We refrain from eating a little bit to perhaps express some solidarity with the earth, or at least reflect what's happening to the earth. And as Bob said, we're raising consciousness around it. Referring back to the source sheet, I'm just going to summarize a few of the next sources quickly. We won't read through them all, but let's just hold this thought. This is the premise for much of what happens in Mishnah Ta'anit, in this volume of the Mishnah, that there is a connection between drought and fasting, and for all the reasons that have been said, and probably more. And everything else sort of flows from that basic idea that there's a connection between droughts and fasting. So in the next few Mishnayot, which we won't read in detail, essentially what happens is Mishnah says, if the rain continues not to fall, in other words, if the drought starts to look more and more severe, we escalate our response. More days of fasting, we start refraining from other things. The whole community gets involved. And at each step, a few more practices fall into place. If you could just scroll forward to Mishnah 1:7, this is sort of the final stage of escalation. I'm just going to read through this quickly so you get the idea. We started with 1:4. It's a few weeks after Sukkot had ended when we started praying for rain. We wanted it, so we have a few days of fast. And if it keeps dragging out, we add more and more things. If all these fasts, Mishnah 1:7 says, if all these fasts have passed and they have not been answered, in other words, rain still hasn't started falling, they decrease their engagement in business transactions, in building and planting, in betrothals and marriages, and in greetings between each person and their fellow, like people who have been rebuked by God. The individuals resume fasting on certain days, not every day, of course, until the month of Nisan ends. So now we're talking about a whole rainy season that has passed and no rain. That's a really bad drought. After this date, they no longer pray for rain, since if Nisan has ended and rains fall after that, that's a sign of a curse. And then it offers a biblical proof for that. Again, we want the rains to fall when we need them. If they fall at the wrong time, that's not only a sign that things are out of balance, but it could be bad for the crops and for the fields. Again, this progression of escalation. Why do you think we've added these final set of restrictions at the end? We decrease our engagement in business transactions, building, planting, betrothals and marriages, greetings. Why that? Why have we added on top of just fasting these kinds of limits? What do you think? I see Bob's hand up, and then we'll take other comments. Bob?
Well, I was going to say something else, but I'll answer your question first.
Okay, thanks.
I think that as we accelerate refraining from activities that would give us joy, we recognize that something has gone wrong.
Yeah.
And hopefully we introspect. What, if anything, could we be doing differently as a society and as individuals? So that's why I think it accelerates.
Yeah.
I'll ask you what you think, but let me say what I was going to say. This whole Mishnah that you're showing us applies to everyone, whereas I would look at other parts of our tradition, like the story of Joseph in Egypt, and I believe Solomon made storehouses. There are many traditions about people who have some kind of power being proactive to buffer the variabilities of the beneficence of nature. And so I think it's like interesting. I mean, I'm thinking about the world we live in right now. Right now, a certain percentage, I could look it up, of potable water in Israel is produced in desalination plants. That has its own issues because they use energy, blah, blah, blah. But it feels like I want to hear about the Mishnahs, if you're going to show us any, or maybe Rabbi Julie will show us some, that talk about what people with power, it doesn't have to be the monarch. It could be business leaders. It could be mayors. It could be synagogue presidents. You know, do we have any Mishnahs like that? Anyway, that's my question.
Baruch Shekivanta, you've anticipated one of the directions that we will be heading very shortly. So a couple more comments on this Mishnah, and then we'll move to some material that gets into the social structure and questions of power and public action. Becky, and then Rabbi Fred.
I'm just noticing here that says, like, people have been rebuked by God, that we should be acting like people are punished. I'm picturing like just the dog with the tail down, like between its legs, like don't act happy, like this is not appropriate right now. But what's really coming up for me is a profound discomfort with the text in terms of this feels like people who are on the other end of the political spectrum from me that are like, that hurricane came because of gay marriage. And like, now I happen to know that there is a scientific basis for that our drought is in fact based on human behavior. And so it doesn't feel the same present day to say that the droughts are coming because of human behavior, but not gay marriage isn't the human behavior. The human behavior is, our profligate waste and fossil fuels and all that stuff. But I don't know if at this time of this writing of this text, they did think that it was scientific, that connection was there. So it's just entering a discomfort zone for me. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for naming that. So with all these texts, there are a number of things going on at the same time. And one of the strands for sure is a kind of theology that probably most of us these days aren't thrilled with. However, in the last half century, we've also discovered a way in which even that theology, as you alluded to, Becky, does have a kind of scientific basis. So, sexual mores don't determine how the weather works, but other kinds of human behavior, particularly at a societal level, really do. And we could talk about, if we wanted to, we could certainly talk about those systemic human behaviors that do cause problems in the weather and in the environment. We could call those sins, if we want to use that more traditional language. And those sins, if you like that term for these purposes, do actually have these kinds of actual real world consequences. So as with everything in traditional Jewish texts, we're not only free to, but encouraged to interpret them in ways that work for us. So we can, is there an angle on that traditional theology that works for us? Perhaps there is. Also, there are other things going on here, as we've alluded to, the ritual that reflects what's going on with the Earth's body, the kind of solidarity with the Earth. All of those things are going on, and we can use the parts that are most generative. Rabbi Fred, and then we'll move to the next source.
So thank you so much. Apropos of Becky's point, I always like to try to interpret these things as natural consequences as possible. And it's interesting that among the prohibitions that the rabbis add when the drought is most severe is the erusin ubenisuin, that they're not even engaged in engagement and marriage, right? Which is in their thinking, procreation. It is acknowledging that there is less of a future for us if this continues, with then the understanding that once we actually do the work that we need to do in this sort of theological frame, to alleviate the worst of the drought, we can go back to affirming that there is a future. But it's really kind of logic for the climate anxiety that so many of us feel, along with the permission to allow the minor successes to buoy us back into a place of hope.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Again, a kind of reflecting, hey, if there's less of a future, if there's less life generation going on for the Earth, we'll tone down our procreation at the same time in response to that, in reflecting what's going on for the Earth. Thank you for that great point. It's not business as usual. If the drought has gone on this long, we tone down, we reduce our engagement in all sorts of business as usual activities to say, we can't ignore this. We can't go on like nothing is happening. Over to my colleague and friend, Rabbi Julie Saxe-Thaler, for the second chapter of Mishnah Ta'anit.
Thank you. What a great group and discussion. And I imagine Josh told you that I was just, we were off on our time zone. So I'm so happy to be joining you. So we're going to read chapter 2, the first Mishnah, which has really become a favorite of mine. And maybe I'll just invite somebody to read it aloud to us, having the foundation that we have now from what we've just read. Would someone like to read in English?
I can read that.
Beautiful.
What is the customary order of fast days? Normally, the sacred ark in the synagogue, which was mobile, was kept in a locked room. However, on fast days, they removed the ark to the main city square and placed burnt ashes upon the ark as a sign of mourning. And they also place ashes on the head of the Nasi and on the head of the deputy Nasi, and each and every member of the community likewise places ashes upon his head. The eldest member of the community says to the congregation statements of reproof. For example, our brothers, it is not stated with regard to the people of Nineveh, and God saw their sackcloth and their fasting. Rather, the verse says, and God saw their deeds, that they had turned from their evil ways. And in the prophets it says, and rend your hearts and not your garments, and return to the Lord your God. This teaches that prayer and fasting are insufficient, as one must also repeat and amend his ways in practice.
That was that last piece was repent.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. Great. Thank you so much. Thanks for reading that with feeling. So there was a lot in there. So let's slow it down and go back. And just what can people say something about what stands out for you in maybe the visual image of what's being described, or just the impact of who's involved here. We had a little foreshadowing of this from, I think it was from you, Bob. But what's going on? Now we're not only talking about what we can and cannot do, but we're putting on a kind of, we're taking some action. We're getting together and we're doing something. Could be called a ritual.
I had never heard of in Jewish tradition of putting ashes on the forehead. I always associate that, of course, with the Catholics. So that's interesting.
Isn't it? Yes. So we're doing this physical thing, which it seems ashes would invoke what?
Grieving, death.
Yeah.
Has
Destruction, grieving, death. Yeah. And we're putting it on our head, right? We're so visible. And I've never done it. I have never put ashes on my head. Has anyone here ever put ashes on your head for any kind of symbolic reason? I imagine it would be very impactful. And who is doing it? Who's putting the ashes on the head?
The leadership. That was Bob's point.
Mm-hmm.
What is the leader's responsibility?
Yep.
It's the Nasi, and it's the president and the vice president of the court
Yeah. I mean, I think both of sort of like, can we imagine our president and vice president, or our local, most, well-known local leaders? So people we know, but also people in a position of authority. And they're out there not saying, oh, well, other people should fast, or other people should even put ashes on their head. No, we here are maybe humbling ourselves and doing this public mourning. Can anyone, does it invoke anything else for you? Any other times that, and I'm not thinking of anything in particular, but just inviting people to think about, have we experienced anything in our lives that's akin to this?
Now, what about the kriya, the tearing of the cloth of the clothing?
Yeah, absolutely. Similar to putting ashes on our head when we tear our clothing and we have an outward symbol of mourning. Have we seen anything like that in public of our leaders? These kinds of, you're absolutely right, Myrtle, that I think what's similar about kriya is that it's an outward symbol of an inner feeling.
I feel like no, we just see the opposite. No humility, no error. Like, okay, fine, we'll pay this hush money in this lawsuits and just settle out, but we didn't do anything wrong. Exxon, who flooded a bay with fossil fuels, or whatever it might be. It feels very the opposite.
I would like to know if there were ever cases in the state of Israel after 1948 when the chief rabbi or chief rabbis publicly refrained from some consumption or joyous activity in response to anything but an environmental shortage. I don't know about that. That probably means it didn't happen, but I live here, so I wouldn't know everything they've done.
Yeah. I don't know of a time of that kind of public fasting by a chief rabbi. Yes, Faye.
I think that what stands out to me is not just the public fasting, but that this quote is about not how the fasting works, but how it requires that you change your ways. It's just a tool to get your attention. And in its anticipatory mourning, where it's sort of like the Tisha B'Av is sort of increasing mourning before the days of Tisha B'Av, but until you get to that fast day, that's to try and get you to reflect on what you're doing. So to me, that's the most interesting piece of this Mishnah, is that not that they actually did this, but that they're quoting a text that says, he saved Nineveh because they changed their ways.
Yes. Yes. Okay, we'll come more to that. But I think, and you're also bringing up, I think, Faye, the question of who's the audience, who's the target of this this outward display, to whom are we trying to communicate? And you said reflection, and of course with an outward symbol, you also potentially are trying to communicate to someone other than, in addition to yourself. So just take a moment to imagine, what would be the impact of actually seeing this?
Actually, the closest thing in my life that got a lot of publicity was during the energy crisis, which was partly caused by boycott of Middle Eastern oil supplies, but there were other factors. Jimmy Carter made a point of wearing a sweater several times when he had press conferences and TV things, and was not shy about saying, we've, turned up or turned down the thermostat in the White House, and it's not uncomfortable. I have this nice sweater. He got so much flack for that.
Yeah.
So that's the last one where I remember wide social discussion, of course, like for 2 or 3 days.
Thank you for that reminder. That's such a powerful image. We have other things like, I don't know, Michelle Obama, getting people gardening, right? But that kind of refrain, that kind of what you just described of being willing to openly and publicly change is, like Becky was just saying, extremely rare, or maybe we're having trouble thinking of a time. Yeah. And maybe, yeah.
And back to Jimmy Carter, I understand he put solar panels on the roof of the White House, and then when Ronald Reagan was elected, he promptly removed them. Yeah.
Wow.
It was like the first thing he did.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Wow. So we thought we would actually have people do a little chavruta, a really brief. I'm wondering if that makes sense time-wise, Josh, or if we should stick in the group.
We're
I think we need to stick in
possibly
the
a
group.
little low on
Yeah.
time.
Great, let's stick in the group, and I'm going to put some questions in the chat here that we can all consider for this next part, and we will be a big chavruta. And why am I not just getting the chance to send that to everyone? There we go. Here. So yes, coming to this question about Nineveh. Let's look back at the text. I need to switch my screen here. Go back to the quote. Here we go. So the eldest member of the community says, wait, everybody, remember, it says God saw their sackcloth and their fasting. It says that, but that's not the reason for the reversal of fate. It doesn't say God saw their sackcloth and their fasting, and then they were okay. It says God saw their deeds, that they had turned from their evil way. So one question is, well, then what's the point of this fasting and rending our garments? Why should we do this? Here we just had a description of a ritual. Take the Torah out into the public square. Put ashes on your forehead. Do something really public. But it is a ritual, right? Mm-hmm. It isn't actually changing however we're treating each other necessarily, or whatever it is that we were doing wrong, how we were treating the land, how we were behaving towards each other. No, this ritual is a ritual. So why do a ritual? And again, maybe that's another way of asking, who's the audience for this ritual? Becky.
I love this focus on the importance of ritual, and the thing that I am that's coming up for me is how much, as a climate activist, that there's a lot of psychological studies out there showing that like focusing on the doom and gloom and punishment like turns people off. And I spend a lot of time saying to people, this more sustainable, climate-friendly future we want is one we should be running to. It is not one of fasting and deprivation, but it is, but with an entirely different twist. Like, we're not going to drive as much, but we're going to bike more, and that's wonderful. And we're going to that there's all these things that we want. And I'm thinking about like the ritual that a lot of synagogues are doing now when they switch on their solar, and they have these amazing events, synagogues that are tying it at Hanukkah to the eternal light, and like some of the themes there, and showing like we just did this amazing thing that is better for the earth. It's going to save us money. Like it was like there's no like, and now we're going to sit in half the dark. Like, no, we have our lights on, the room is comfortable, we've done all these good things, and there's been no sacrifice. And we'd like to emphasize that there's no deprivation and no sacrifice, and that we can be living these rich, high quality lives with and be doing the right thing and ritualizing that. So I just would like to see like some of that positive ritual going on.
Thank you. Other thoughts? Other folks? Yeah, Dave.
I just see this gathering, and this, I imagine this gathering sort of like Kol Nidre in our synagogues, where it attracts the whole community because it's so stark, it's so drastic, and it's an opportunity for the rabbi to give the best, most important class of the year, or orator of the year. And it's the opportunity to speak, and the elder is required to reproof the people with this thing that says, now it's time to act. Let's get our deeds in order. Let's figure out what we have to do. Not by saying, I know what you have to do, but by saying we have to do something. We have to act. I see it as a call to action more so than an act of mourning. They put on the ashes and sackcloth or whatever, but they don't just like sit down on the square and pray. They're called to act. They're called to evaluate what their deeds are.
Beautiful. Okay, so the ritual itself is a call, and it has a different kind of impact than just a speech or a sermon or someone standing on a soapbox and shaking their finger at us. Yeah. Yes, good.
Hey, just a shout out to our collective teacher, who is the elder in our midst now, Arthur Waskow, who's been kind of doing this since 1968, 69, the Freedom Seder, and the Shalom Center is still, in the panoply of great Jewish environmental and social justice efforts, really linking this. And the core insight is that you can be sustained in the work of sustainability and be in it more for the long haul, and with sharper focus if it is grounded in spirituality. There's also the way in which it is an effective organizing tool, and in which the audience is in part the prospective members of your coalition, and in part the larger public to try to move the needle, and in part yourself, simply to stay in the work.
Thank you. That was a great shout out. Thank you so much for that.
Julie, should we take that
no, we're
mention
gonna-
of elders as an opportunity to segue into the
Perfect.
next piece, which we'll do
Yes.
briefly? So with thinking
We're
about
almost out of time.
thinking about who is the first to have the ashes on their head, what the symbolic weight of that is, what does that mean socially in terms of power, ritually, and how does that lead to changes in actual behavior? Let's scroll down a little more and look at Mishnah Ta'anit 2:2. Now it's talking about what happens on these fast days in the prayer service. It's and I'll just read this quickly and summarize some of the context. They stood for prayer, meaning they're going to say the Amidah. The congregation appoints an elder who's experienced in leading prayer to descend before the ark, meaning to act as the Shaliach Tzibur, the prayer leader. And this prayer leader must have children and must have an empty house, so then his heart will be fully concentrated on the prayer for the needs of the community. And then he proceeds to say the Amidah, the usual 18 blessings, and another 6 special ones for this fast day. There are special criteria for the prayer leader on these fast days, and they're very specific. He's got to know how to pray well. Fine, that makes sense. He's got to have children and an empty house. Why should he have children and an empty house? Okay.
Because food is important if you have to feed your family. And the empty house, I assume, means he doesn't have much.
His cupboard is bare.
His cupboards.
And he has mouths to feed. This person who's going to be our emissary on this most important day feels the need. He has real mouths to feed. He has real needs in his household, and he can't meet them. And the drought, damn it, is making it worse. This person feels it. If I were to put this, and Julie and I have talked a lot about this as we've learned this material together, if we were to put this in a contemporary idiom, the phrase frontline community comes to mind in a big way. This guy is a frontline person. This person experiences the effects and the impact of this weather problem, this environmental problem, this drought, the potential famine, firsthand in a very personal and very urgent way. Even before the others in the community are who are one step removed, maybe they have more savings, they have a bigger house, fewer mouths to feed, they have a craft. This person is the farmer, the first to be impacted. Those kids can't feed themselves. This is the person who feels it first. And here in our Mishnah, our tradition 2,000 years ago, our sages are telling us, make that kind of person your emissary. Let them lead you. Let them speak for you. Could have been ripped from the headlines, could have been ripped from the manuals of activism, climate activism that have been written in just the last decade. Let the people most impacted most immediately and urgently and severely impacted by the climate crisis lead the way, follow their lead, listen to their voices, let them be the chief spokespeople. We're all in it together. The whole congregation is praying together. There's one person who's sort of acting as the leader, and it's this frontline person. And speaking of how we coordinate our efforts and how we work together, Julie will take us home with Mishnah 3:3 as a concluding note.
I'll just one comment on the previous one. Just you were talking about it, Josh. I'm just thinking about the way that it can seem very just symbolic that we're going to put what we call a frontline person at the lead and say that they should have sort of the honor of being our leaders. But when I think about some people that I've learned from in my life, and particularly thinking about resource and people's access to resources, I would say one of the teachers who has made a biggest difference in my life was a person who grew up really poor. And I learned a great deal from her over a period of years just by being around her. And sometimes it wasn't what she was explicitly teaching me, but the way she lived her life. What I learned about was resourcefulness and how to do a lot with a little. And it makes me think that it's really not symbolic to put that frontline person at the head, because that is a person who knows how to waste less and to use our resources well. So yeah, let's close out with just this last Mishnah. Likewise, so we're at the bottom, Mishnah Ta'anit 3:3. Likewise, if there's a particular city upon which it did not rain, while the surrounding area did receive rain, this is considered a divine curse, as it was written, and I caused it to rain upon one city, but caused it not to rain upon another city. One piece was rained upon, and the portion upon which it did not rain withered. In a case of this kind, that city fasts and cries out by blowing the shofar, and all of its surrounding areas join them in their fast, but they do not cry out. Rabbi Akiva disagrees and says they cry out, but they do not fast. And just to say as a closing, what Josh and I talked about was the idea that maybe it's not exactly the same. You don't do the exact same thing as the city that is in drought, but you do something because you're in a kind of solidarity. You don't want to forget your neighboring community and that we are a connected world. So just one more piece that we might draw on. I'm sure that the people here, this group is here because we're already engaged in responding to the climate crisis. So we hope that the Mishnayot that we looked at today become resources, subjects of conversation, texts you can take with you as you think about creative ways to show up in our movement using ritual and our resources. Thank you everyone so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. I hope everybody can turn on their mics or their video or something and respond to how incredible it is to bring these amazing texts into our modern context of what we have to do and how we have to organize ourselves. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
For
Yeah. It was great
bringing
learning
it
from
to
you.
us in such a profound way.
Have a
Thank you
wonderful
both.
Pesach. Kasher v'sameach.
And to all of you,
Pleasure.
Pesach
And it was
Kasher
great to see
Sameach, and the
familiar
next
faces and new
session,
faces.
the next session begins in 4 minutes.
Okay. Julie, you want to stick on?
Sure. Nope. I was just trying.
Thanks, Estelle. It's good to see you.
Good to see you all.
See you around the East Bay soon, I hope.
Yeah, I was hiking while listening, so sorry.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Oh, it's a great place to learn climate Torah.
Yeah, we do the ashes on the forehead at the opening of the Seder. We do water rituals, washing the feet, and ashes on the forehead. Been doing it for years.
Wow. Beautiful.
Amazing.
I mean, impactful. Maybe not beautiful. But powerful is what I really meant.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Faye, thanks for what you said and for all your participation. That was really great. And yeah.
I have to admit, I get impatient if nobody else is going to reply. I think we got to keep that discussion going. So
Oh, people were. I thought
Yeah.
people were
Yeah.
replying.
it was really good. Yeah.
Thanks. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank
Okay.
you.
Arlen. Yeah. Awesome.
All right. I don't know if I can leave you here to talk to each other. I don't know if you wanted
Okay.
to, but
Yeah, we'll just talk.
I-
We'll chat.
I
Uh,
suspect
and
that
Faye, I
Oh,
think you're one of the
if we get
coordinators
cut off,
here?
we can call each other on the phone.
yeah, I think I have to end the meeting.
Yeah, no
Exactly.
problem.
Okay.
Faye, you're one of the coordinators?
No, I'm a Limud board member, a Limud North America board member. So I
Oh.
just am one of the hosts for the day,
Yeah.
Zoom hosts.
Okay, that's what I meant. Yeah, you were Zoom hosting this room. Yeah, sorry for the
Yeah.
lateness. Yeah, as I said, my
Life
mother-
happens. What are we
yeah,
gonna
my
do?
mother passed away, and
I'm so
I've
sorry.
been vermished, as my dad has been saying. So this is
We were all set to start just perfectly right at 2:30 our time.
And what time is your time? Where are
We're
you?
both in
Pacific.
California.
Oh yeah, well that would yes, okay. We would have been waiting quite a while. So yeah, I actually I had one session where the gentleman was also sitting and waiting to start an hour later, right? Because he was in a different time zone also.
I'm really grateful that whoever was on and stuck it out so that we did have a really good sized group.
Everybody stayed, nobody left.
Fantastic.
well.
Okay.
Hannah knows how to get in touch with me. It's good to meet you, Faye, and everyone. And
Thank you for
we
doing
can get
this.
in. You can get in touch with Julie as well through me.
Here, actually,
Good to
why don't
meet
let me
you.
put my contact in the chat?
And I'm really glad to add another Limud. I had previously taught at Limud Seattle when I was serving a community up there, and really glad to do something with Limud North America.
Well, so there are conferences all over the country, and Hannah can put anybody in touch with you.
Great.
Right on. Good to
Thank
meet
you.
you.
Say, I just
Yeah,
put
we'll do
my
that.
I just put my email in the chat if you would add me to
Right.
whoever.
I'm just copying it out for the next time I need it. Let me just put it somewhere. And my mouse would work. Okay. Thank you.
Pleasure. Okay, look
I'm
forward to
very
connecting with
fond
you
of
again.
this, bringing Mishnah into modern context. It's my favorite thing.
Ours too.
So, okay. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.